Welcome to this episode of Vision Alignment, where we get to understand how important it is to have our core beliefs, our core values aligned with our vision. If you can make sure your vision is aligned with your core beliefs, you're going to be much more happy, much more successful, much more, I guess I would say, just a nicer person. And you're going to experience life in such a much different way. So make sure that your core beliefs and your core values are aligned with your core vision. Now, having said that, we've got a great guest coming on today, but we have more guests coming up that are just as good as the one we have today. Not any better, I'm sure. But stick around to the end, and we'll talk a little bit more about them because they are phenomenal. So I'm really looking forward to them. Now, without any further ado, we need to understand that we all have blindness in our lives. So if we can understand how important it is that we have that blindness, if we can embrace our own personal blindness to achieve a greater vision, that's what it's all about. And that is what our guest is going to tell us a little bit about what he's experienced. And he is Ryan Campbell. Please welcome Ryan. Hey.
G'day, Brian. How you doing?
Good morning, Ryan. How are you?
I'm all right, mate. I'm doing pretty well. Keeping out of trouble.
Good. It's good seeing you.
Likewise.
I've appreciated having you as a friend over the past few months, years maybe. It's been a while since you came to the U.S. and joined the National Speakers Association. But I want to, if you would, please just give our viewing audience an idea of your story. So take as much time as you want. I'm going to go off screen, and you can have the floor to yourself.
As much time as you want is a dangerous offering. I'm just a normal Aussie kid anymore, laid back. I'd be lying down. I'm 26 years old. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and I have a little bit of a wild background, one that surrounds aviation, with aviation being the very thing that provided me the absolute best experiences of my life, but also the absolute worst experiences of my life. And because of that, which we'll touch on, I am now based here as a professional keynote speaker. With our brand, Turbulence Tough, we talk all about the mindset required to ride out life's roughest bumps. Now, my background, when I was 6 years old, I have two older brothers. My dad was a local milkman. My mum was a stay-at-home mum. When we were 6 years old, we were put onto a Boeing 737 to head off on our very first overseas trip as a family. Mum and dad had never been overseas. We'd never been overseas. It wasn't the destination that changed my life. It was actually that flight on that Boeing 737 to an island in the Pacific Ocean called Vanuatu. I remember climbing on the airplane at 6 years old, placed by the window and taking off. I remember being pushed back into the seat. I remember that nose pitching up and the ground dropping away. I remember looking at Sydney and the cityscape, just being blown away as a young kid at how big that city was. But I really, truly will never forget the moment that we flew and climbed through the clouds. Now, prior to September 11, this was a day when we could actually go up to the cockpit and meet the pilots, walk through that cockpit door. The entire, I suppose, roller coaster of experiences that day for such a young kid left a permanent mark, and that was that I discovered my passion. I discovered my passion at a very young age. And I knew from that moment on that aviation would be a huge part of my life and that I would grow up to be a pilot. The long story short, so we don't run out of time, Brian, is that when I was 14 years old, I wanted nothing more to learn to fly. I still had that dream at that point. I'd worked my way through school, had a few years left. I wanted to learn to fly an airplane, but common sense told me that I'd at least have to have a driver's license and a bunch of money in my bank before I could actually pursue getting my license. I did need money. That was a guarantee, but I was incorrect about the age. It turns out you could actually learn to fly an airplane before you can learn to drive a car. And I found that out through a local newspaper article on a kid who flew an airplane solo for the very first time the day that he turned 15. So 15 years old, his 15th birthday, he flew an airplane on his own. I remember reading that article, just envious beyond belief. I wanted nothing more than to be him. I read that article over and over again. Every time his name popped up, I'd replace his name with mine. I was so jealous. So I took this, if he could do it, why can't I approach? And I found an after school job, a weekend job, and I started to fund my way through 1 hour's flying lesson every 2 weeks. And on my 15th birthday, I climbed into an aeroplane and flew it all by myself. That day, that experience was not just about being able to fly an airplane, but discovering what is possible when we just put our mind to it, absolutely obsessively work towards that one goal, what we can achieve even at 14 and 15. It also made me want to achieve everything I could within aviation at the youngest possible age. So at 16 years old, I had a license that allowed me to fly friends and family and passengers in a small restricted area around my home airport. So I was flying my buddies from school in the airplane. We were honestly just going for flights at the end of the day. But I had a deal with those friends because here I was able to fly an airplane, still not old enough to drive a car. And all my buddies who were older than me could now drive a car on their own. So the deal was, if you take me from school to the airport, I'll take you flying, but you've got to drop me back home. So 16, we were flying all these different adventures. 17, I had a private pilot's license. 18, I had a commercial pilot's license. And aviation had truly taken over my life. Uh, but it was at 17, as you know, Brian, that my whole life really took this weird, unique turn
Hmm.
when I decided I wanted to become the youngest pilot, the youngest person in history to ever fly a single engine airplane solo around the world. Um, that was the perfect example of biting off a lot and then chewing really, really quickly, choke. And we spent at 17, we spent 2 years of planning, training, fundraising as a normal Aussie family. Not only did I train as a pilot and convince someone to rent me a single engine airplane, but I raised $250,000 with my family and my team on a laptop computer, and we pulled off what truly was an almost impossible goal of flying 24,000 nautical miles solo around the world, 35 stops, 15 countries, a 70-day adventure that had never been done before as a teenager. It was a history making expedition, but it was also a life changing adventure for a lot of people, including myself, my family, and a whole lot of people who were inspired and encouraged from that trip.
So you don't come from an affluent family?
No, I just no, it we're just kind of a like, that's my favorite saying in the world is normal as a kid, any more laid back, I'd be lying down. And I think if our story is not the 70-day trip around the world, but it's the 2 years of planning and training and fundraising, and the stories embedded in that time are just, some of them are just side splitting. You just can't believe what, what connections all linked together and how it all worked to be able to get to that point where you could even take off and attempt to flight around the world. That itself is where so many lessons were learned.
Huh. Wow. Wow. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Keep going.
No, you're right. So here I was at 19 years old, flying an airplane solo around the world. It was a great big adventure, followed by 60 Minutes, the Today Show, and all sorts of, media outlets. And, we gained really, really good traction with that adventure. As I mentioned, yes, we created history, but that really wasn't what was important at the time. What was important was the people that we'd affected by doing it, and inspired and encouraged to pursue their own adventures and tackle their own challenges in life, but also learn to fly and take up aviation as a hobby or a career. I found myself at 19 years old having finished that flight, and we could talk about all the ups and downs of the adventure for hours, 60,000-foot thunderstorms and icing over the North Atlantic. The shortest leg was 20 minutes. The longest leg was 15 hours in a single engine airplane with 160 gallons of fuel in the back seat. We could talk about that for hours, but where we ended up after that trip was back in Australia, on the speaking circuit, living an incredible life. I was 19 years old, writing a book, published at age 20, called Born to Fly, full of spelling mistakes. My nan can tell you every page number of every spelling mistake in that entire book. But I was meeting the royals. I met Prince William and met Prince Harry, and
Really?
yeah, 100%. I got a phone call. Would you like to meet the Duke and Duchess? I think it was Cambridge. And I remember thinking, who is that? I'd love to do that. And they said the dress is lounge suit. And I remember thinking in my head, what's lounge suit? I nearly said to this girl who worked for the Governor General, she was the assistant to the Governor General in Australia, I nearly remember saying to her, "What's a lounge suit?" And I was like, "Don't say that, Ryan. Play it cool and ask mum later." And I did. I said to mum, "What's a lounge suit?" So I went and I met Prince William, and one of my favorite stories is not that I met Prince William. We talked for 5 solid minutes on aviation and adventure, and like we just got on really, really well.
Hmm.
And it's not that I was lucky enough to be chosen to meet Prince William. It was that I didn't want to eat any of the food at the reception. It was all green and caviar and like all this weird food. And
Uh,
I'm a 19-year-old typical teenager. I'd left meeting Prince William in that suit, climbed into my car, which at the time had a lot big wheels. It was lowered, had a subwoofer in the back, and I
hmm.
drove to KFC. And I had fried chicken in this very expensive suit that I just met the Royals in. And I remember, these guys were cleaning up the KFC, wondering who is this guy? Why is he dressed like that? Why is he here at 11:30 at night? And that's what, for me, just reminds me that regardless of how wild the experiences are, that I was going through at the time,
Hmm.
uh, I was still just a normal Aussie kid. I'd just taken a big leap of faith and pursued something incredible. And so all these wonderful things happened.
One
Uh,
thing, well, hold on, right there, right there. So before we go too far, I want to make sure everyone online knows to share this video out with anybody that anybody is in your group. So whether it's on Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever, just share this video out with as many people because we've got a great story coming here. It sounds like we've gotten a lot already, but there is so much more that Ryan is going to tell us. So, share this video out. Put in hashtag replay if you're listening on a replay. But if you're listening live, put in a hashtag live. If you have any questions for Ryan, by all means, ask them. We'd love to ask them. And if you do it in the replay, put them in the comments, and we'll look at them and we'll get them back to you. Six managers. So anyways, so go ahead, Ryan.
So yeah, I mean, I appreciate that, and let's get it out there, and we'll talk about turbulent stuff. So let's get that out there as well. But I found myself experiencing all these wonderful things. Life was great. I was 20 years old, and everything had gone so incredibly well up to that point. And I was offered a job with my dream airline, the airline that I wanted to fly for since I was 6 years old. But I had this burning desire within me to want to fly old airplanes, specifically World War II fighter airplanes. So I thought, I'm not going to take that job with the airline. I'm going to turn that down, and I'm going to pursue flying old airplanes and build up my experience in that area of the industry, and then work closer, step by step to this goal of flying warbirds and old aircraft. I took a job flying a 1930s open cockpit 2-seat biplane. It was an incredible machine. My job was to fly up and down the coast of Australia to take one person at a time on an adventure flight to do some aerobatics if they were that way inclined. And it was an incredible job. It was an incredible opportunity. It was a lot of fun. And it was, unfortunately, a job that would change my life in many, many ways. On the 28th of December 2015, I went to work. It was just a normal day, no oceans to cross, no records to break. And we climbed into that aeroplane early in the morning. I had a gentleman on board with me. We lined up on the end of that runway and we took off just like any other day. Just as the runway disappeared beneath the nose, we had an engine failure. I pushed the nose down and did absolutely everything I could within my skill set and experience. Everything I could, everything that I was trained to do. Yet in 3 or 4 seconds, it was all over. With nowhere to go, we ended up in a horrific accident. And I was cut from that wreckage, placed into a helicopter, and airlifted to hospital as the only survivor. So in a split second moment, my life had gone from this incredible place of a high, higher than most people would ever experience in their life, to a lower than a lot of people will ever experience in their life. I was operated on immediately, 5 breaks in my back, shattered face, shattered ankle, removed ankle, cuts and bruises from head to toe. And I woke up in a recovery ward with no movement or feeling below my waist down. I was diagnosed a complete paraplegic. It was at 21, just shy of turning 22, the moment that changed everything for me. What followed was 6 months, almost 6 months in hospital, a year and a half in rehabilitation, a journey from having a wheelchair built for me through to slowly getting a flicker of a toe, a twitch of a muscle, a little bit of movement back below my waist. A lot of time invested in rehabilitation and with an incredible team to finally get back on my feet. Again could talk for hours about that process and that chapter of my life, but I was so unbelievably lucky to find my way back to walking now. I look like I've had too many Tennessee whiskeys, and there's still a lot of things wrong with me internally and externally because of that spinal cord injury that is lifelong. But that journey in itself of getting back to my feet and then back into modified airplanes and flying helicopters to commercial level as an incomplete paraplegic, to then moving to the US as a keynote speaker was
Hmm.
very long, multiple year journey that resulted from that one day that changed everything. And for me at 21, it wasn't easily seen at the time, but what I'd been given was an opportunity, whether I liked it or not, to compare the highs and the lows at a young age, to have experienced both ends of that spectrum and start to ask some questions based on that experience of, where do we learn? What actually turns us into the best human that we can be? What allows us to operate at our maximum potential? Where do we pick up the tools, the tips, the tricks to become tough and resilient and equipped and ready and confident, and all of these good traits that we want to be able to tackle life, which unfortunately will always involve adversity to some extent. It's simply a byproduct of breathing. So that comparison opportunity to say, hey, where do we become our best self, was an incredible opportunity, leading me to the general answer that it's the low moments in life, the adversity that we all experience, that provides us an opportunity for growth, to better ourselves, to be our absolute best. And we live in a world where we too often shy away from that. So now uh, my purpose in life is helping others to become turbulence tough, to understand what mindset they require, the tools and the tips that they can use to harness that adversity, turn it into opportunity, and build resilience and confidence, in their day to day life, not just at home but at work. So,
Yeah. So if I were to ask you, and typically this is what I ask, if I were to ask you what is the biggest factor in your success, I would think you might say that the tough times, the turbulent times.
yeah,
Is there something else you would say with that?
yeah. The key for me, for what I've discovered, the absolute core of it is that resilience, which we all seek out and want, resilience is found not in the tools that we acquire, but in the place that we store them. So, we are surrounded by tools. I mean, this right here is access to the world's tools.
Yeah.
And if it were only a question of access to tools and tools alone, we'd all be the most resilient humans on the face of the planet, and we'd
Mm.
all be very, very resilient. But that's just simply not the case. And that it comes down to not having access to the tools, but more so knowing what to do with them, how to use them, when to use them, how to keep them sharp, where to store them. How do we take the confusion of too many tools and turn that into clarity and confidence? And that, for me, is done through a concept called the Mindset Toolbox. So we talk a lot about the Mindset Toolbox. We talk a lot about filling that toolbox. And then what do we do with a full toolbox? How do we utilize those tools? What little systems, checklists, techniques can we put into action? Little quick 2 minute, for example, my 3-step checklist to navigating change is my 3 favorite tools from my toolbox: gratitude, confidence, and resilience. And that's what I
Mm.
use to tackle the tough days, the tough weeks, the tough months, or in this case, the tough year. Uh, so we talk a lot about that idea of knowing where to put the tools, that foundation, not just getting out there and finding more and more tools.
Okay. So you're 26 years old.
Yeah.
I'm 53. I think of challenges and obstacles that I'm still working through. What you seem to have? You seem to have it all going for you, and I'm so envious. But I'm wondering, what are some of the obstacles or challenges you're still working on?
Yeah. I mean, life is hard, and it's so easy to look across the fence and see greener grass. And mate, like, I've texted you this week to tell you about this week alone, and without diving right into it, this week alone, it's been one of the hardest weeks, it's been the hardest week I've had in 5 years.
Hmm.
And and it all goes back to the accident and, people on the internet saying things out of my control and, really pulling me down and hurting me.
Mm.
And, you know, in moments like this week, in moments like this year, missing home, wanting to be in Australia, being locked out of your own country, missing family, dealing with a pandemic, trying to launch a business in a pandemic. I've had a week of incredible lows just this week, and I've also had the best week of my work life. Being lucky enough to pull in some really incredible clients to get to work with their people and make a difference. So,
That's
you know,
awesome.
that in itself this week is a perfect example of how my life has been, highs and lows. It comes down to our own personal ability to have that toolbox, be able to reach in, pull out the tools that we need and help us kind of move through the bumps. At the end of the day, mate, I always said that learning to walk was a mental challenge, not a physical challenge. If
Mm.
learning to walk again is all above the shoulders, then life is won and lost above the shoulders. And we have to invest into our own personal development, our own mental health. We have to have that foundation of confidence. We have to be equipped and ready to tackle whatever comes our way because, as for me this week, it's been a tough one. So, I don't want anyone to think that at 26, just because of what I've experienced and the way that my head works, that you've got it all together. I will struggle with personal struggles for the rest of my life, as will everybody else. There is not one person who has it all together. And, you know, mate, we have to have that toolbox to fall back on. We have to be able to ride out the bumps. We have to be able to, as I say, not just divert around the thunderstorms that we can see. I mean, as a pilot, we can see a big 60,000 foot thunderstorm, as I did on the round the world flight. We can fly around that, or we can turn around and run away and fly the other way. But
Mhm.
it's the clear air turbulence that gets us. It's when you're flying along, sipping your wine, just casually having a beautiful day, wondering what you're going to do in New York City, hopefully go to M&M World, but, sitting back, having a daydream, and then you hit that clear air turbulence, the adversity, the bumps that nobody saw coming. That's the time in life where you've got to be quick on your feet to be able to kind of, bounce back, ride out those rough bumps, ride out that turbulence, get out the other side. And that is, at the end of the day, what being turbulence tough is all about.
So tell me, this is amazing. So really appreciate your story. But what's the best advice you've ever gotten?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, gosh. I remember being in hospital having so many people want to help me. Now I had so many people help me during the round the world flight. It was I say we took off and we landed and we flew over, the
Mm.
Pacific and this and that.
It was
People
you.
people always question and say, weren't you the only person in the airplane? I said, well, yeah, it was me and Bob the life raft was strapped into the other seat, but it wasn't. It was a solo expedition driven by a team. And, my life is the exact example of that is, I have incredible people around me. I remember being in hospital where the Mindset Toolbox was born. And I remember struggling so much with all of these tools, these tips and tricks, pieces of advice that were being given to me by others, whether it be a doctor, a nurse, whether it be my mom, my dad, my brothers, my family, whether it be friends, whether it be absolute complete strangers.
Hmm.
Now, the reason that I was overwhelmed is I was being given all these tools. I didn't know what to do with them, where to put them. I was simply overwhelmed. I was a deer in the headlights. That's where the Mindset Toolbox was born. This concept that we all have a mindset toolbox. It's big. It has wheels. It has drawers. We take it with us wherever we go in life. And the aim of the game is to take those moments, those lessons, convert them to tools, unpack those stories, and place them into that toolbox. So we're taking easily forgettable moments, placing them in an unforgettable drawer. So that's what my life has been all about.
Hmm.
Let me tell you about the coolest tool, one of the coolest tools I ever put into that toolbox. Now, as I say, I had so many people providing me tools, but it was this one day that I went to a cafe right outside of the hospital and I wheeled down there in my wheelchair and I
Hmm.
wheeled into the table and I was meeting a guy called Paul de Gelder. And I talk about him all the time. He's incredible. He's on Shark Week constantly. He's an Aussie. He's a
Really?
speaker. He's incredible. Now,
Okay.
Paul was a Navy clearance diver for Australia. He was in Sydney Harbour when he was attacked by a shark and he lost his arm and his leg
Hmm.
on one side of his body. He's the fittest, most incredible, driven human I've ever met in my life, which for me makes me feel, as someone who loves food far too much, he makes me feel really bad. But Paul sat down with me that morning we had breakfast, and he told me 3 words. Now, after all this advice I'd been given, 3 words hit me like a truck, and that was sink or swim.
Mm.
And in those 3 words, sink or swim, he didn't even have to explain the concept. He didn't have to explain those 3 words, because I could look at Paul and understand that at one point in his life, he truly had to choose to swim. Quite literally, he had to choose to swim.
Yeah.
And it was now up to me. And it was up to me every time I come to a hard moment in life, just like this week. I have had to choose to swim this week. We have 2 options. We can choose to swim and do what that takes to get back up to, the point where we were before, if not hopefully an even greater position in life, or we can give up and decide to sink. And if we sink, as harsh as this is, it's a very long, slippery slope to in mental decline down to a point of potentially even suicide. And I'm
Yeah.
quite blunt with that. Um, I chose to swim that day. And every time I come up against a hard day, I always choose to swim. Once you've made that decision, you got to know how to swim. That's where the mindset toolbox, gathering of the tools, using of the tools, deciding to be turbulence tough comes into it. But those 3 words with that incredible guy, with Paul, were just it was just an easy moment in my life to make that decision.
Oh, that's incredible. I love that story. So what's Paul's last name again? I'll put him in here.
De Gelder, Paul De Gelder, Degelder.
Degeler.
Der, yep, De Gelder. You got to deal with my accent here.
LDER.
Yep.
So let's see. Is that it?
That's him.
Oh,
That's him.
okay. Cool. Well, everyone that is watching, they can look at that and see the name and look him up. I'm sure he's probably on the internet as well.
He is. Yeah, you'll be able to find him.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So, what does the next level of success look like for you?
A beach with a margarita, I think. Maybe this year.
You live in Tennessee. I'm not sure you're going to find a beach.
I have struggled in Tennessee. It's a long way from the water, I can tell you, as an Aussie beach kid. But no, in all honesty, for me, this idea or the brand of Turbulence Tough and teaching other people and organizations how to be Turbulence Tough is so important to me. And we are surrounded by incredible assets, not just speakers, but like yourself, but incredible assets all around the world that allow us to find new tools. But I really want to be that go-to guy to talk about building a foundation, a place to store, a place to manage the tools that we are all acquiring and investing in acquiring every day all around the globe. So we want to speak where we're pushing onto stages more and more. We're obviously delivering virtually from the studio, but we're booking in persons for next year. And I'm excited for 2021. I'm excited to get out there and share the Turbulence Tough mindset with so many people, as many as we possibly can.
Oh yeah.
And honestly, it's building a life where I can speak all around the world and travel with my partner Rachel and live in Australia and live here and kind of go back and forth and just make a difference. And I always thought I was destined to be a pilot, and I was, and I still wish I had the physical ability to go and fly airliners or pursue that career path in some way, shape, or form. But at the end of the day, and as I said on a stage last week, I don't want to be a speaker. I still don't. I want to be a pilot, but I am a speaker because the message is far greater than my unwillingness to stand up and deliver it. And, we have to be able to, understand when we have an opportunity to affect people's lives. And for me, a quick example, and I'll give him a shout out because he's an incredible human. But last week, I got a message from a gentleman who I'd never met before on WhatsApp. And it was a simple, he'd watched a podcast or a session like this, discovered my story, the Mindset Toolbox, the story behind the Mindset Toolbox, which we didn't get time to dive into today. But I received a message from this gentleman. He was based in Germany. His name's Goran. He was in an accident 4 years ago, paragliding. He was a career pilot beforehand, and he's now faced with a very similar diagnosis to myself. Getting back on his feet, he's standing up, he's walking, but he is restricted with what he can do in his life. And after 4 years of chasing help in some way, shape, or form, he never truly found it. He had a lot of struggles in his life, as we all do, especially, I understand his struggles with a spinal cord injury. We talked for an hour and a half on the phone, and it was the Mindset Toolbox and that simple way of thinking, really elementary way of thinking, to allow us to take those easily forgettable moments, unpack them into tools, place them in an unforgettable drawer, that helped Garan. And when I heard his response to my story and, the Mindset Toolbox and what we offer, this idea of being turbulence tough, and how much it helped him, it truly made me realize that, this is what we need to do. And you're a perfect example of that, mate. Like we that's why I reached out to you in the very beginning. It was just, we have to use what we have to help the world around us, because, it can be tough some days, and it's up to us to make a difference. So that is my future, is trying my absolute best to be a normal Aussie kid that makes a difference.
Wow. Yeah, that makes it all worthwhile, doesn't it? So yeah, I appreciate you. I appreciate what you do, and I appreciate you reaching out to me. I mean, I had no idea that this would become such a lifelong friendship. So
100%.
I appreciate it all. So thank you so much for coming on today. I truly appreciate that as well. There's so much value that's been gained by us, by me, and everybody else on the call. So, thank you for that. I really appreciate it, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on.
All right. Thanks, Ryan.
Cheers.
All right. Hey, and as always, before we go, let me just drop Ryan off back in the green room. But before we go, want to make sure that we talked about what we have coming up tomorrow. Tomorrow we have Derek Arden, who's coming in from UK. He's coming in from London. He's an amazing guy that can help us with our ability to negotiate, whether it's negotiating with our wife or negotiating with our spouse or with whatever, negotiating with in business, any of that. He can help. And he's going to help a lot tomorrow. And then on Friday, we have Jay Bear coming in. Jay is a world-renowned speaker. He speaks on customer service. So he's going to be here at 10:30 as well tomorrow on Friday. But then Friday at 11:30 is going to be Rosemarie Rossetti. She's going to be talking about disabilities and how important it is for people with disabilities and their caregivers to really understand each other and communicate much more. So look forward to that. Look forward to it all. I appreciate everything that is going on here with this group. I appreciate all of you being on the call today. So thank you very much. And as always, keep one eye on the road.